And we're back in the car like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of this Monday afternoon here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. I'm wearing my Teddy KGB shirt. However, this will not be a Teddy KGB or John Malkovich or Rounders themed episode. This will be the newest entry in our continuing series simply titled The Great Movies. And this is a film that is certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. It's in the 70s as far as the tomato meter, which indicates generally good reviews. It's a film that's now more than a quarter of a century old, but I feel like it's even better now than when it came out, because there were certain elements in the movie that they seem to be taking leaps of logic as far as technology and what was possible or what could be possible with GPS and Big Brother is always watching and all of these kinds of elements. And if anything, the film underrated just what was in store. The movie is Tony Scott's 1998 suspense thriller, Enemy of the State. And Enemy of the State is a film that was an enormous box office hit. The major critics mostly liked it. It was probably in my father's all-time top 10, although he, same as me, he didn't see the film in theaters. I did, for whatever that's worth. He just wasn't, it wasn't the kind of movie that he would ever watch in theaters, but he ended up catching it at home and just loved it. It doesn't seem as if it would be the sort of movie that would have a rewatchability factor, but I think he appreciated, John Voight in this movie is a little bit less hammy than he had been in his previous film, Rainmaker, but he plays a similar kind of character who at some point in his life probably had integrity, but just pretty much threw it out the window because, reasons or money or we don't really know. But this is a film that was originally, the project was earmarked for a lot of other big actors of the era. And it ended up going to Will Smith. And when you watch the film, it would seem pretty logical. You wouldn't say, oh, there's no way that Will Smith was the first choice. Because, okay, Harvard-educated attorney, highly intelligent, a family man who's had a little bit of adultery issues along the way, but a family man, somebody who wants to be a better husband, et cetera, et cetera. And he's presented as a guy pretty much the age that Will was at the time, early 30s. Will was around 30. And we just go from there. But this was a project where the protagonist was written somewhere between 40 and 50. And this was a project that a lot of the big names passed on, from Gibson and Costner. And I think Stallone had a look at it. I don't know that he was officially offered it. Clint was too old. But Costner, Gibson, and I'm pretty sure Bruce Willis as well. If they didn't turn it down, then they didn't express enough interest. And then the story was kind of retailored for a younger Harvard graduate. Now, of the names I mentioned, I guess Mel would have probably been the best choice at the time. He was very busy in that era. He made Lethal Weapon 4 in 98. He did, Payback was originally going to come out a lot earlier than it did. That came out in 99. He did Conspiracy Theory with Julia Roberts in 97. He had Ransom in 96 after Braveheart, which was a hell of a difficult production. So Mel was just working. It could have just been as simple as he didn't have time. I mean, occasionally you just sort of run out of time. But Will is really strong in this role. And there are movies that I feel don't take enough advantage of the actual characters' characteristics and things that they're capable of doing. So, for example, Tom Cruise. I'm sorry, Tom Cruise was one of the people who was discussed for this. It's funny because I was about to bring him up. In John Grisham's novel, The Firm, which was made into also a very successful movie, although not as good a movie as Enemy of the State, if I have a say. But in the world of John Grisham's book, Mitch McDeere is presented as a guy who is incredibly intelligent and has a photographic memory on top of the fact that he has an IQ of above 150. It is a critical component of the book that this is not a normal smart person. This is a normal smart person times 10. And it plays into a lot of different moments and big sequences in the book. It doesn't really pay off in the movie to the same extent as it does in the book. And so there are certain things that we as the reader absorb that you really can't show. Show, don't tell. That's the whole idea. If it ain't on the page, it ain't on the stage, or in this case, on screen. But in the world of Enemy of the State, it's as if Tony Scott took lessons from some of the things that Sidney Pollack was not able to do in this, previous big budget story about a lawyer who's really smart. And the fact that Will went to Harvard and is clearly exceedingly intelligent and clever, they don't ignore it. This is not Will Smith screaming, who's the man now? Who's the man now? This is a guy who is he's able to reason things out in his head. He is able to come up with strategies and ideas that appear to be completely ridiculous. Well, maybe they are, maybe they aren't. The masterstroke of this film, though, is Gene Hackman basically playing the same character that he plays in Francis Coppola's Conversation. That is a fan theory that I fully embrace. A lot of fan theories, we laugh, they're kind of funny, whether it's the Karate Kid, well, if you look at it from a certain angle, Johnny's the hero, and those sorts of fan theories. But I accept the idea that at the end of the movie, The Conversation, Gene Hackman's protagonist, Harry Cole, is basically a broken man, exits personal business that he was in of wiretapping, goes to work for some arm of the United States government, becomes even more disillusioned, and we meet him 20-something years later in the world of this film. Even though his name in this movie, I think, is Edward Lyle, who goes by Brill, it's Harry Cole, as far as I'm concerned. But the character that Gene plays in this movie it's the showy role, where basically he's the only person in the story that might have some answers for Will's character of Robert Clayton Dean, or just, most people just call him Dean. It sounds like it's his first name, but it's actually his last name. The setup of this is pure Hitchcock. And I mean by that it's a mistaken identity kind of a concept, even though it's not really a mistaken identity. It's more of a mistaken person gets information that they shouldn't have gotten. But it follows the form of a mistaken identity, Hitchcockian, North by Northwest, The Wrong Man, The 39 Steps, etc., of that kind of film. And there are shots in this movie of Will Smith running towards the camera. Tony Scott frames it just like Hitchcock, that famous scene with the crop duster in North by Northwest, where Cary Grant, who was dressed a lot better in the world of that film and at that moment than Will, who's wearing a bathrobe in Enemy of the State. But we're supposed to, well, if you think the way I do, you're supposed to draw parallels. You're supposed to say, oh, this is the North by Northwest moment. So Will's character inadvertently takes possession of sensitive materials. They're very sensitive, and cliche though this may be, in the wrong hands, it's curtains for a lot of people at high levels of the United States government, including John Voight's scumbag senator. Now, I don't know which character is worse. I think the senator in this movie is worse than the guy that he plays in The Rainmaker, who's just kind of a crooked attorney. Well, not even crooked. He just doesn't give a shit. He's getting paid a lot of money, and he's going to get up there and, do whatever he can to win a case. Or his interpretation of Jim Phelps in Mission Impossible in '96. I think this guy he's really bad. I don't know if he's the worst of the three, but he's certainly no worse than second as far as that goes. But it is a road movie. It is a chase film. It has those elements of North by Northwest, where you have an innocent man who is maybe more clever than he lets on, or more clever than people give him credit for, even though the people in the story know that Robert Clayton Dean is a Harvard graduate. He is quite intelligent. They don't guard against the fact that he might be smarter than they are. In the world of North by Northwest, one of the surprises is that, Cary Grant as Roger O. Thornhill gets mistaken. It's not a question of sensitive material and we got to get it back and maybe kill this guy. It's that the bad guys in that film, Van Damme and his henchmen, they're convinced that Roger O. Thornhill is someone else, that he is actually a secret agent. And that's why they need to kind of put the squeeze on him. But at a certain point in that movie, Roger O. Thornhill might as well just assume and pretend that he is the secret agent. It doesn't matter. He can't talk anybody down, so fuck him. He starts making threats. He starts dictating the action rather than just being on the run all the time. He stops playing defense. He plants his feet. And at a certain point in Enemy of the State, Will's character of Dean, it's time to stop running. You know, it's the opposite of the Running Man when Richard Dawson screams, it's time to start running. It's time to stop running. It's time to face these guys down and let's just see what happens. And that allows Gene Hackman to have, I don't want to say it was the last truly great line reading of his career because he is fire. 5 years later in Runaway Jury, the adaptation of the Grisham book, which is a strange adaptation because the book was about cigarette smoking and the movie is about gun violence. That's a pretty big maneuver to kind of change the core of the book. But in that movie, Gene has a series of incredible dialogue beats where he just lets everyone have it. And in this film, he's not surprisingly working with Will against his wishes. He really doesn't want to get involved, but he knows that his life is now also in danger because this idiot showed up at his door and nobody's supposed to know where I live. What the fuck are we doing? And he blows up his house, and Will in the trailer famously screams, why'd you do that? Because you made a phone call. But the movie does not clue us in as to what Will's kind of ultimate plan is, how they're going to get out of this mess. And it's pretty clever when we realize in the middle of a scene exactly what it is. But he presumably tells Gene's Edward Lyle what he's going to do. And Gene Hackman, while eating a pretzel, he gives him that stare, that 1,000-yard stare that Gene Hackman used to such incredible effect in so many different movies. Whether he was playing good guys or bad guys, he just had that unbelievable stare where there's almost a 5% snarl or sneer or smirk, and the rest of it is just looking right through you. Like I own you from the movie Get Shorty, where his character gets coached on how to do that. Gene just stares right at him and goes, you're either very smart or incredibly stupid. And Will doesn't miss a beat. We'll see in a minute. And then the movie goes from there. One thing that Tony Scott was known for and gets to show it off here are the kind of high velocity action sequences, the kinds of things you saw in movies of the 80s and 90s, guys wearing masks, rappelling down buildings, and, you know, pipe bombs and all kinds of explosions where you think that you actually see the actors and how did they do that to not, you know, where the guys wouldn't get hurt. But there is a lot of running. There is a lot of jumping. There's a lot of, there's not that much in the way of fist fights, but there are a lot of close-ups, a lot of rapid cutting, and with the continuous GPS and the positioning, setting and resetting and setting and resetting. Man, there's so much stuff in this film that not only came true, but they undersold where the world was headed. And that's why I say this is a film. The action elements are what they are. And either you buy the story and the simplicity of the wrong guy giving Will this information that there was actually a guy that he knows, Jason Lee, the actor, that he just happens to run into someone that he knew from Harvard who's all fucked up. He's the one who gives him the information. So either you accept the premise and you kind of go along with it or you don't. Most people did. But where this film is timeless is in how the notion of security, the notion of eavesdropping, the kind of broad sense of should the government, whether state, local, or federal, should they be allowed to listen in on any conversation if they simply claim we have the law on our side? And this movie is taking the position that, no, not exactly. You got to have a little bit more than that. That's not good enough because we see the horrendous abuses of the technology in this film. It's not being used at all the way that it's supposed to be. And that's also not something that really connected for me with the first time I saw the movie, 24, however old I was. I wasn't thinking that the fact that they're using the technology just purely for devious ends, well, we can't do this. Well, unfortunately, in the real world, there's a lot of tech that's terrific. There are a lot of ways that we can keep connected with people, but it's often, and it's not always used for nefarious reasons, but we kind of don't maximize the good. We simply look for the neutral or the negative. And in the world of this movie, a lot of the really great, groundbreaking, cutting edge technology, it's not really used for very good reasons other than make money, make threats, or threaten to kill somebody, or, in the immortal words of Chevy Chase, the answer is D, all three. Now, before I forget, Enemy of the State is streaming free on Amazon Prime right now. I don't think the movie has ever been on Netflix. I'm not sure about that, but I don't think that it's ever been on Netflix. But if you haven't seen it, by all means, there are some people that are just not going to get into any more Will Smith movies because of the slap at the Oscars. I don't forgive, I don't forget. That was real. Within the realm of, bad, that was really bad. But I'm not, I'll never watch another movie with Will Smith. It doesn't, for me, it doesn't rise to that level. I have seen movies of his since then that I hadn't seen previously, like Collateral Beauty, not that good. 7 Pounds, not that good. But Enemy of the State is a film that I would revisit. Let's say a friend hadn't seen it. Hey, you want to watch it with me? Yeah. Because this is a film, because of the execution of the action sequences, because of the kind of hamminess of Voight's performance, man, he's just chewing it up. And then the previous year, I forgot, he also did Anaconda. I should have brought that up. When he winks at Jennifer Lopez, a top 10 great moments in 90s cinema. Boy, did he play some great villains. Different levels of villain. The guy in Anaconda is not as bad as the guy in Enemy of the State. He might not even be as bad as the version of Jim Phelps that we get in Mission Impossible. So by this particular ranking scale, the guy that he plays in The Rainmaker, as much as he's a real heel, and you understand why Matt Damon's Rudy Baylor wants to beat the shit out of him, he's bad within normal parameters. He's not a serial killer. He's not Lex Luthor. He's just a guy he's getting paid a lot of money. He's just going to say whatever his client wants him to say. But Voight's performance is super entertaining. And then you have soon-to-be big stars in small roles, such as, well, Barry Pepper didn't exactly become a big star, but it was right around the same time he filmed Saving Private Ryan. And you have Jack Black, terrific in a small role, also as a tech. It's just one of those films where you almost say, I think is Seth Green in it? But there are a lot of faces that would become more recognizable where you say, wow, I didn't know this person was in the movie and that person. So Tony Scott was great with casting. And the movie just has a kind of graininess. It's hard to describe, but it has a graininess. The image is very clear and crisp, and the graininess is almost, it sort of puts in the back of your mind, or maybe this is even being recorded. Like, this is a paranoia film. And I mentioned how the character of Harry Cole from Francis Coppola's The Conversation, I see Edward Lyon. This is basically, it's the same guy as far as I'm concerned, because he's also a paranoid surveillance expert. But in the world of the movie The Conversation, there are the same kinds of questions, much lower tech, much lesser equipment, where somebody really had to be a genius to do the kind of isolating audio that Gene's character of Harry Cole is able to do in that film. But that movie asks those kinds of questions. What if this tape gets into the wrong hands? Same kind of thing there as here. The movies cover very similar territory. And if it's not an official sequel, spiritually, Enemy of the State is a sequel to The Conversation. And the glasses that Gene wears in this film are the same, literally the same pair that his character wears in The Conversation. Tony Scott was no fool. He knew exactly what he was doing. And I believe he shot this film with it in mind that it's okay if I'm not going to get angry if somebody says this is like a sequel to The Conversation, because the sense of creeping dread and paranoia, it's written all over every frame. And in this instance, it's not paranoia if they really are after you. Will Smith steps into something and he is scared, but at the same time, he's not going to give up. He can't just let them get him. He has a wife. He has kids. He has a career. He has a life. And he's going to stand up and he's going to fight for it. And one of the kind of weird things about North by Northwest in this regard is that Cary Grant doesn't have a family. As he says, he has 2 ex-wives and several bartenders depending on him. Like, that's his motivation. What's your motivation? His motivation is that his 2 ex-wives and several New York City bartenders depend on him. That's why he's going to keep going. That's why he's not going to just fold up and say, okay, Van Damme, you got me. No, he's been challenged. He's pissed off. None of this should have happened. He's going to see it through then. You think I'm George Captain? You think I'm a deadly secret agent? Yeah, that's exactly who I am. What are you going to do about it? And goes from there. And in the world of this film, Robert Clayton Dean, Harvard-educated attorney, brilliant lawyer, super intelligent individual. Well, he's running, and then he's not going to run anymore. And maybe there is a way, and the movie Eraser a couple of years earlier has a similar twist, where a career criminal might be the key to getting out of a really nasty jam. That's not really much of a spoiler, but in the world of this film, it's a similar twist to what Arnold pulled off in the movie Eraser with the Robert Pastorelli character, who is somebody who is in the witness protection program. And late in the movie, he kind of comes to, this is not really much of a spoiler, he kind of comes to Arnold's aid in a way we don't expect. And there's a character in this film that comes to the aid of Will and Jean in a very, very clever way and almost in a humorous way. And it takes a movie into an entirely different direction. For me, the film doesn't lag. It's exciting from the very beginning all the way through. There are no dead spots. Every moment that Gene is in, it's just gold. He was magic on screen. There's just no way around it. There are very few people that could make a quote unquote bad script seem passable as he could in films such as Loose Cannons or even his last movie, Welcome to Mooseport. But with a good script and with an interesting character, I don't think Hackman was capable of doing anything other than hitting a home run, as he does here. And Will has recently talked about Gene. They became friends. I know that's a cliche, but Gene really got a kick out of him and took him to his house, which unfortunately, as we know, his body was discovered a couple of weeks ago. It doesn't seem that it was anything, there doesn't seem to be any foul play. The wife was sick and she died at least a week before he did, they're saying. I mean, it's not good, but at least they weren't murdered. You know, she got hantavirus, it looks like, which I wouldn't wish on anybody. And he was in the grips of advanced Alzheimer's and he passed. But he and Will went to that house that Gene owned in New Mexico for decades, and he just thought it was the greatest thing he ever saw. And when he was working on a different home that he was moving to, he actually used the same designer that Gene had. And you can see Will trying to keep up with him in this film. And it's like Will's on screen with a powerhouse talent already at that point, the 2-time Oscar winner, and he doesn't want to get shown up. He doesn't want to embarrass himself. So he's giving every line reading 100%. He's not, as I say, there's no who's the man now. There's no, oh, hell no. He's not doing any of his usual shtick. He's keeping the performance at a certain level. And as much as there's a lot of stuff in this movie from the technical and pyrotechnic standpoint, well, this couldn't happen and that couldn't happen, the story still holds us. And hey, it was the 90s. There were a lot of movies where a ton of shit blows up real good. And this is one of the best examples of a film where a lot of shit blows up real good, but it's still overall an engaging story. And for the technical elements that have dated so well historically, Enemy of the State, in my opinion, is a great film. Enemy of the State from 1998, directed by Tony Scott, starring Will Smith, Gene Hackman, Jon Voight, Jack Black, Lisa Bonet, forgot about her, and Regina King as Will's wife. This has been episode 465 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of your Monday afternoon here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Until then, peace.